The sun hadn't risen yet, just a thin line of grey touching the windows. And in that half-light, the house felt like it was waiting for something. Not waking, just waiting. I called her name once, softly, the way I always did. But the sound didn't land anywhere. It just slipped into the quiet, like the walls refused to hold it. I remember standing in the hallway with my hand on her doorframe, the wood cool from the night. Most mornings, Lily would already be stirring, tangled in her blankets, mumbling something about 5 more minutes. She never woke early, not once in 16 years. But that morning, there was a stillness I didn't recognize. When I pushed the door open, it didn't creak the way it usually did. The hinges were silent, as if even they were trying not to disturb something. Her room smelled faintly of the lavender spray she pretended she didn't like, and the air still held the warmth of someone who had been sleeping not long ago. The curtains were closed, but a pale seam of light stood across her desk like a thin blade. I called her name again. Lily. My voice sounded small, childlike. The blankets on her bed were half folded over, not kicked away, not tossed aside, just folded. Like she'd sat up slowly, like she planned to stand, like she meant to come back. The pillow was still dented from her head. Her hair tie rested beside it. For a moment I thought she might be in the bathroom brushing her teeth. But the door there was open, dark, the mirror untouched. I stepped further in, the floor cold under my feet. Her phone lay on the nightstand, screen dark, battery full, the little green icon glowing like an accusation. She never left without it, not even to take out the trash. Something pressed heavy against my chest, not fear, not yet. Just the sense that I'd arrived 1 minute too late to something I didn't understand. I sat on the edge of her bed for a moment, letting my fingers rest where hers should have been. The sheets were still warm. That warmth moved through me like a whisper telling me she hadn't been gone long. Lily, where did you go? My voice didn't echo. The room swallowed it whole. Then I noticed her backpack missing from its usual place against the wall. For a heartbeat, relief bloomed. Maybe she left early for school. Maybe she was walking with friends. But the relief didn't settle. It drifted away as quickly as it came, because her shoes, the ones she needed for the rocky path outside, weren't with the bag. I checked the closet. The shoes weren't there. I checked the bathroom. Not there either. My heartbeat got louder, like it was trying to knock its way out of my ribs. I walked toward the kitchen, calling her name more urgently now, the quiet of the house pressing tighter with every unanswered word. The kitchen window glowed pale with early morning, and for a moment I imagined her sitting at the table, legs pulled to her chest, waiting to surprise me. But the chair was empty, the cereal bowl clean, the glass still dry. I moved to the back door, the one she used when she wanted to sit outside and watch the morning fog crawl across the grass. The latch was unlocked. And that wasn't like her. When I pushed the door open, a breath of cold air touched my face sharper than I expected, like it had been waiting against the door all night. The yard was still, quiet except for the soft rustling of the trees lifting themselves into the morning. And there, placed gently beside the welcome mat, were her shoes. Not thrown, not dropped, just placed, side by side, facing inward, as if she had stepped out of them right there. My hands shook when I touched them. They were warm. Not warm from the sun hadn't even reached the porch. Warm from skin. From her. It felt impossible. Like she had been standing there only moments before I woke up. Like I had missed her by seconds. I lifted the left shoe to my chest, holding it the way a mother shouldn't have to hold a thing instead of a child. A chill ran down my spine, sharp and immediate. Because if she left willingly, if she ran away like some of them would later claim, why would she walk barefoot into the cold September morning? Why would she abandon warmth for frost? Safety for shadows? I looked out past the yard where the fog clung low to the ground, hiding everything past 10 feet. My breath trembled as it left me. Somewhere out there, she had stepped into something I couldn't see. Something that didn't want to leave footprints. I stood barefoot on the porch, holding her warm shoes, listening to the yard breathe and settle. The world felt wrong, tilted, dim, as if someone had removed one sound too many from the morning. I whispered her name one last time. Nothing answered. Only the fog moved, curling towards the tree line as though it were following someone. Or something. Unseen. And in that quiet, a single question settled inside me like ice. Why would my daughter leave everything behind, except the warmth she left in her shoes? The porch light was still on when he arrived. It flickered once, the way tired bulbs do, casting his shadow long across the quiet yard. Officer Pierce didn't knock right away. He just stood there, looking at the door, as if the house itself might speak before I did. I remember thinking the same thing, that the walls were holding their breath. And maybe in some strange way, so was I. The morning had already started wrong, but it wasn't until I opened the door for him that the wrongness settled into my bones. He stepped inside with the careful slowness of someone who'd been in too many grieving homes. "Mum," he nodded, voice steady, polite. But his eyes, they moved differently. They scanned the hall, the framed pictures, the faint crease in the rug near the stairs, like he was piecing together a story the house wasn't ready to tell. I tried to steady my hands, but they wouldn't stop trembling. I kept them close to my chest, like that would hide the shaking from him, or from me. He asked where Lily's room was, and I led him down the short hallway. The floor creaked under us, a soft, old whisper of wood. It felt like the house was remembering every step Lily ever took, and noticing the steps she didn't take this morning. He paused at her doorway, didn't enter yet, just stood there, letting his eyes adjust to the stillness. "She usually up by now?" he asked gently. I nodded. "She never misses school," I managed. The blankets were still half-folded, the air still faint with her lavender shampoo. Something about the room felt paused, not empty, just paused. He finally stepped inside. Officer Pierce didn't move anything, not at first. He just looked. The kind of looking that isn't really about the eyes, more like listening with them. A quiet sweep from the nightstand to the closet door, to the small pile of notebooks by her bed. He noticed the phone immediately, the black screen reflecting a sliver of morning light. Fully charged, unused. "That's unusual," he murmured, mostly to himself. I swallowed hard. "She doesn't go anywhere without it," I whispered. "Even the bathroom." He gave a small sympathetic exhale, not quite a sigh, not quite a reassurance either. He stepped closer to the blankets, touched the edge with 2 fingers. Still warm. I felt something inside me fold. We moved to the back door next. I stood beside him, clutching the shoes I'd found on the mat, her shoes, the soles still faintly warm when I picked them up. I hadn't let go since. He knelt by the welcome mat, brushing the edge of the wood with his hand. The morning dew shimmered outside. Perfect, undisturbed. "No footprints," he said quietly. His voice stayed calm, but his eyes, not so much. He stood slowly, his uniform crackling in the silence. "Mrs. Hale," he began, but his gaze drifted back toward the yard. If she had walked out, even barefoot, the dew would have caught it, disturbed it. I tightened my grip on the shoes. "Maybe she stepped over the mat," I said, even though I didn't believe it. He shook his head gently. "There'd still be signs, grass bends, leaves shift." His eyes softened. "There's nothing." The word nothing felt heavier than anything. He came back inside, checking the front door. The latch was still in place, not broken, not forced, just untouched. "Has anyone else been here this morning?" he asked. "No," I whispered. "I woke up alone." He nodded once, writing something in his notebook. The sound of the pen felt loud in the quiet house. "Ma'am," he said after a long pause. "This doesn't look like she ran away." I looked down at the shoes, her shoes, and something cold slipped down my spine. "It looks," he continued softly, "like she meant to come back, like she stepped away for a moment and didn't get the chance to return." His voice didn't shake. Mine did. He asked if he could check the yard again, and I nodded, unable to speak. I stayed in the doorway, holding those shoes like they were part of her. The morning light spilled across the empty porch, soft and pale, touching everything she'd touched last. The air smelled of cold earth and a silence too deep for a normal day. Officer Pierce walked slowly into the yard, scanning every inch, careful, intent. I watched him disappear behind the shed. And in the stillness he left behind, one quiet thought pressed into me, sharp as a needle. If Lily left on her own, why does it feel like the world swallowed her whole? The morning light lay thin across the street, the kind that doesn't warm anything, just shows what's missing. I stood on my porch with Lily's shoes still tucked under my arm, watching the quiet houses blink awake one window at a time. Nothing moved, not a curtain, not a dog. It felt as though the whole neighborhood was pretending to sleep, even though I knew someone must have seen something. I started with the Harper's house first, the one on the left. Their place always felt like it belonged in late winter, no matter the season. Pale siding, tightly drawn blinds, garden stones arranged too neatly, like they were afraid of surprises. I knocked softly. The sound felt too loud on their door. Mr. Harper opened it just a crack, enough for one eye and half a breath of cold air to slip through. "Morning," he said, though it didn't sound like one. I'm looking for Lily," I began. "She didn't come down for school. If you noticed anything strange last night." He looked over his shoulder instinctively, as if checking who else might hear, though the house behind him was as quiet as a sealed envelope. "We keep to ourselves," he murmured. "But my wife said something about a noise." My stomach tightened. "What kind of noise?" He hesitated, the door still half blocking him. "A humming, faint, like a generator starting up, or a big piece of machinery from down near the lake." His eyes shifted, not at me, but past me towards the narrow path that disappeared between the trees. I thanked him, though the word felt thin, and moved on, before the silence swallowed me too. Mrs. Ellison's house was different. Warm brick, wind chimes trembling with every small breeze, and lace curtains that fluttered like they knew more than they should. She opened the door before I even knocked. "Oh, Margaret, sweetheart." I heard, her voice soft, but her eyes bright, not unkind, just always alert. I stepped inside because she ushered me in, not because I wanted to. The smell of lemon polish and old paper filled the living room. She held my arm the way someone holds fragile things. "I didn't see her leave," she said, leading me toward the kitchen table, "but there was something odd." She paused, letting the words settle like dust. "A light, flickering in your kitchen around 2. I blinked. 2? No, I went to bed by midnight. The whole house was dark. She shook her head gently. "No, dear, I watched it for a few minutes. Dim, like someone moving slowly with a small flashlight." My throat tightened. Could have been a reflection, a car, something outside. "No," she said, no hesitation. "It was inside." Then she added softly, "And it went off all at once, like someone closed a door." For a moment the kitchen clock felt too loud, ticking between us like an accusation. I stepped out of her house with a kind of quiet that pressed on my ears. A flicker of light I didn't remember. A humming near the lake. Pieces that didn't fit. Not yet. The path home ran between our houses, a thin stretch of grass leading toward the tree line. I walked slowly, the morning dew brushing cool against my ankles. Halfway down, something caught my eye. A bend in the wet grass, not a footprint, not even close. Footprints are small, specific. This was wide, smooth, as if something had brushed across it, sweeping the blades in one long gesture. I knelt, fingers trembling as I touched the flattened patch. Still wet, still cold, but the shape, it wasn't human. It wasn't even shaped like wheels or hooves. Just a long curved sweep widening as it moved toward the lake. I followed the direction with my eyes. The path wound into the trees where the shadows held the last pieces of dawn. No footsteps beside it, no broken branches, no drag marks. Just that impossible sweep through the grass, as if something glided through without weight. A shiver crawled up my spine, light as a spider's thread. I stood at the edge of the tree line, staring down the path toward the lake, feeling the air shift cooler, quieter, like something had passed through long before sunrise. Lily's shoes were still warm against my side. The lake lay somewhere beyond, hidden behind the trees, its surface calm, unbothered. Too still for a morning after a child goes missing. The sweep in the grass curved toward it like a finger pointing. I didn't step forward. Not yet. But I knew one thing with a certainty that hollowed me out. Whatever moved through here last night, it wasn't walking. The fog lay across the lake, like a blanket left out overnight. Low, heavy, unmoving. I stepped through the last line of the trees, and the world turned soft around the edges, as if sound itself had been swallowed. And somewhere beneath that grey stillness, the water whispered against the shore. I held Lily's shoes close, the leather cold now, and wondered why the morning suddenly felt watched. The lake had always been a quiet place, a strip of water tucked behind our homes, a small mirror for the sky. Lily used to toss stones into it on summer evenings, watching the ripples race each other, but now, in the soft grey light, the lake felt like a stranger, too still, too pale. I walked slowly, dew clinging to my jeans. The air carried that familiar lake smell, something between metal and memory. The fog sat so thick I could barely make out the opposite shore. Even the trees seemed unsure of their shapes. I kept scanning the ground, careful, deliberate. Officer Pierce had warned me not to disturb anything, but a mother's instinct doesn't always listen to instruction. Something shimmered near the waterline. Not big, not loud. Just a small glint of colour against all that grey. I knelt before I even knew I was kneeling. My fingers reached before I was ready. The blue, her blue. Lily's hair tied the elastic one she looped around her wrist every day like a tiny bracelet. I picked it up slowly. It was damp, heavy, as if it had touched the water only moments ago. But the ground around it untouched. No footprints. No drag marks. Nothing. Just the fog and her hair tie. I heard footsteps behind me before I heard his voice. Mrs. Hale? Officer Pierce moved out of the fog like someone stepping through a curtain. His shoulders were stiff, his eyes sharper than the morning light. I held up the hair tie, my hand shook. This was just sitting here. He took a slow breath, kneeling beside me. He didn't touch it, he only watched a bead of water slide from the elastic onto my palm. Something in his jaw tightened. "Were you down here last night?" he asked. "No," I whispered. "I fell asleep early." He glanced at the lake, long and steady, as if waiting for it to breathe. Fog lifted in thin sheets, then settled again, hiding the water's surface. Everything about it felt wrong, too alive. "Did Lily ever sleepwalk?" he finally asked. Sleepwalk. The word sounded misplaced, like a joke spoken at a funeral. "No," I said. "Never, not once." He hummed the kind of sound people make when they want to hide concern. "Sometimes stress can—" "She wasn't stressed," I said softly. "She was excited for her art project. She went to bed laughing." Another breath, another glance at the fog. "She didn't walk here," he murmured, mostly to himself. I felt my stomach hollow out. "Then how did her hair tie get here?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Officer Pierce moved past me, scanning the shore. I watched him crouch, stand, crouch again, each motion punctuated by the soft creak of his duty belt. He was tracing something invisible, something he wasn't saying yet. I closed my eyes, listening to the water. It lapped in slow, uneven beats, like a heartbeat out of rhythm. The fog shifted again, curling along the surface, slipping around the edges of stones. Then I noticed something. Small at first, almost quiet enough to ignore. The fog closest to the waterline wasn't drifting like the rest. It was drawn, pulling inward, like breath being taken by something just beneath the surface. "Officer," I whispered, "do you see that?" He looked up, and the change in his expression told me I wasn't imagining it. The fog wasn't moving with the wind. It was moving against it. He stepped closer to me. "Stay back from the water, Mrs. Hale." "Why? What is up?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "And that's why." The lake gave a soft sound, then not a splash, not a bubble, something gentler, a hush. Like something brushing just under the skin of the water. I tightened my grip around Lily's shoes. And for the first time since waking that morning, I felt real fear. I backed away, the fog swallowing my footsteps one by one. Officer Pierce watched the lake like he expected it to answer him. But the water just lay there still, pale, pretending innocence. The hair tie in my hand felt heavier than cloth should feel. Lily had loved this lake. But something else had been here last night. Something that didn't leave tracks. Something that didn't disturb the ground. I looked at the fog drifting in slow, deliberate movements. Whatever brought her to the water, it wasn't sleepwalking. The Harper's house always felt too still, like it was holding its breath. That morning, even the wind seemed afraid to touch their windows. Officer Pierce stood beneath their roofline, staring up at a camera no one ever paid attention to. I stood beside him, my fingers wrapped tight around Lily's hair tie, feeling the ache of a night I didn't witness, but somehow kept replaying anyway. We hadn't planned to check the neighbours' cameras. Pierce had only mentioned it in a tired, passing thought as we walked back from the lake, but something about the way the fog had acted, the way the water felt like it was listening. He couldn't shake it either. The Harpers let us in with their usual quiet nods. They didn't ask questions, they never did. Mr. Harper simply pointed toward a little desk where their home security feed flickered across an old monitor, its casing yellowed by years of sunlight. The room smelled faintly of books and dust. The curtains were drawn, making every pixel on the screen glow a little sharper. Most of the recordings were empty strips of darkness, static shadows, the occasional rabbit hopping across a yard. Pierce clicked through them with slow patience. 12:45 a.m. Nothing. 1:19 a.m. Nothing. 1:58 a.m. Still nothing. I found myself holding my breath with every transition, as if silence itself was waiting to break. Then the timestamp changed 2:13 a.m. And something blinked. Not the camera. Not a person. Just a pulse of light. Small, weak, flickering like a candle fighting for air. It hovered near my back porch. My throat tightened. Pierce leaned closer to the screen. "Rewind that," I whispered, though he already was. He slowed the playback until time itself seemed to stretch thin. The camera stuttered. A frame skipped. The light pulsed again, a soft, timid glow, barely bright enough to shape itself. It wasn't a flashlight, or a phone screen, or anything I recognized. It looked untethered, as if it wasn't shining from something, but simply shining. The image jittered, the pixels tearing sideways like watercolor dragged through too much water. Pierce frowned, muttering something about interference. Mr. Harper stepped back, arms crossed, eyes darting between us and the glitching image. "We didn't see anything last night," he said quietly. "Didn't hear anything either." The light pulsed again. closer this time, hovering just outside my back porch. Right beneath Lily's bedroom window. I pressed my hand to my mouth. Could it be a reflection? I asked, though the question felt hollow the moment it left me. There's nothing out there to reflect, Pierce murmured. Then he paused the frame mid-flicker and the blur formed a shape. Not human. Not clear. Just an outline of brightness, like a smudge of light leaning toward the wall. Toward her wall. Pierce zoomed in, the pixels growing wide and blocky, each one a tiny square of uncertainty. The image jumped again, lines bent, colours bled. Something pushed against the frame, distorting it. Electromagnetic interference, Mr. Harper whispered, though he didn't sound convinced. I took a small step closer. My reflection trembled faintly on the dark monitor glass, a ghost beside a ghost. Pierce slowed the frame to 1/4 speed. The light didn't fade. It shifted. Sideways. Upward. As if trying to find a way in. Right over the siding of my home. Right along the seam of Lily's bedroom wall. My voice broke without sound. Just a breath sharp, unwelcome. Pierce finally spoke, his voice low. This isn't typical motion. And it's not a person. I felt a tremor in my legs. Then, what is it? He didn't answer. He watched the light hover, pulse, then stretch into a thin streak like it was reaching. The screen flickered, brightened, then collapsed into static. Pierce let the silence settle before he said, Something was near your house last night, long enough for the camera to struggle with it. I swallowed hard. And Lily? He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. We stepped back outside, the cold air pressing against my skin like an unwelcome hand. The Harper's roof camera sat motionless, pointing toward an empty yard, offering no comfort in its stillness. I looked toward my home, quiet, ordinary, pretending nothing had changed. But I could still see the light, hovering, reaching, pressing against Lily's wall like it was searching for her. I held her shoes a little tighter against my chest. If something came to my porch at 2:13 a.m., and it wasn't a person, and it wasn't a reflection, then who, or what, was trying to touch her window? The house felt different that morning. Quieter, but in a way that pressed against my ears like the silence had weight to it. I stood in Lily's doorway, watching the curtains shift with the softest breath of air. Her bed was still made the way she left it, pink quilt, folded edges, the corner she always tugged closer to her chin. And yet, it felt like the room was hiding something from me. I stepped inside, careful not to disturb anything, even though everything had already been disturbed the moment she disappeared. The floor creaked under my heel, that long, low groan that always made Lily laugh. It sounds like it's complaining, she'd say. Now it sounded like it was warning me. The morning light filtered through the curtains in pale stripes, touching the posters on her wall, the hair ties on her desk, the half-finished sketch taped above her lamp. I touched the corner of it, a girl standing under a streetlight, her face turned towards the dark. I tried to breathe steady. Detective Pierce had told me to rest, to let his team handle the searching. But mothers don't rest. We return to the places we know, the places our children should be. My fingers brushed along her shelf, over the spines of her books. They were in the same order she always kept them, alphabetical, but only by the first letter. She once told me the rest didn't matter because stories always find each other. That thought made my throat tighten. Something in this room was wrong, or maybe something had always been wrong and I just didn't see it until now. I opened her desk drawer. Pens, stickers, a loose bracelet she never fixed, nothing unusual. But the unease didn't fade. It crawled up my arms as I crossed to her bed and knelt beside the box she kept under it. Inside were old birthday cards, dried flowers, movie tickets, little pieces of a childhood that still felt too young to be in danger. I lifted each one gently, almost apologetically, but found nothing that explained the hollow ache in my chest. When I stood, my eyes drifted toward her backpack beside the chair. She always left it zipped, always neat. Today, a corner of a textbook was poking out like it had been placed in a hurry. I lifted the book and felt something shift inside it, a thin crunch of folded paper. I froze. Slowly I opened it, and a small torn scrap fell into my palm, crooked edges, ripped from a larger page. Lily's handwriting, rounded, soft, curved across the centre. "Mum, I don't think the night is empty." My breath left me in a quiet, shaking exhale. The words didn't sound like fear. They sounded like certainty. I sat on her bed, the note trembling between my fingers. The room suddenly felt colder, like the message itself had opened a window somewhere inside me. I remembered the way Lily had woken last Tuesday, her hair damp with sweat, eyes glassy and unfocused. She had climbed into my bed without a word and curled against me like she used to when she was little. "Bad dream?" I asked. She nodded but didn't look at me. "There's someone outside my window," she whispered. "They say my name, but I can't hear their voice." I had stroked her hair and kissed the side of her head, told her it was stress, school, growing up, all the things mums say when they want to put a bandage on something they don't understand. But as I stared at the note now, I felt an ache in my chest, sharp, like a regret just starting to bloom. If she didn't think the night was empty, then she must have believed something was out there, watching, waiting, whispering to her through the dark. And I hadn't listened. My fingers curled around the paper, careful not to tear it. What had she been trying to tell me? I stood and crossed to her window. The glass was cool beneath my palm. Outside, the yard was still, the grass wet with morning dew, the fence casting long shadows across the soil. Nothing moved, nothing whispered, but the silence felt expectant. I looked down at the note again. The ink had smudged slightly, as if her hand had been shaking when she wrote it. I slipped it into my pocket, close to my heart. If Lily believed the night wasn't empty, then somewhere in that darkness, something had answered her. And now I had to find out what. The morning felt colder than it should have been, not winter cold, just off like the air hadn't bothered to warm up with the sun. I stood by the back porch watching the shadows stretch across the yard as though they were waking slower than everything else. The grass was wet, untouched, still. And then I heard Pierce's footsteps behind me, steady, deliberate, like he was walking towards something he already feared he'd find. He came carrying a small metal device no bigger than the radios my father used to fiddle with in his garage, a little screen, a few blinking lights, an antenna that he extended with a soft click that startled me more than it should have. "It picks up unusual frequencies," he said quietly, as if speaking too loud might disturb the air around us. "Not paranormal. Just signals you wouldn't normally detect." I nodded, though the explanation barely reached me. My attention kept drifting up to Lily's window, a single square of faint reflection, set high against the house siding. Her curtains were drawn, the same curtains she used to hide behind when she watched the fireflies. Pierce held the scanner loosely, but with a kind of respect, like it was something fragile or dangerous. He swept it across the porch, across the steps, across the corner where Lily had once sat with a cup of iced tea, swinging her legs like she had all the time in the world. The device stayed quiet, just a low hum. But the silence around us felt heavy in a way that made my stomach tighten. I wrapped my arms around myself, though the cold wasn't truly the problem. When Pierce stepped closer to Lily's window, the scanner let out a soft crackle so faint I wasn't sure I'd really heard it. He paused, tilted the antenna upward. Another crackle. This time unmistakable. I moved toward him, not too close, just enough to see the tiny screen catch a flicker of static. The sound grew a dry, brittle hiss, like the air itself was grinding against something unseen. Pierce narrowed his eyes, adjusted a dial. The crackle sharpened, then stretched into something thinner, higher, like a voice pulled apart until it was barely a voice at all. I felt the hair rise at the back of my neck. The sound wasn't words, not fully, but I recognized the shape of speech when I heard it, the way breath catches before forming syllables, the rise and fall that doesn't belong to static. "Do you hear that?" Pierce murmured, almost afraid of the answer. I couldn't respond. The noise fluttered against my ears, like a whisper dragged through a long hallway, too distant to understand, too close to ignore. Then, as abruptly as it began, it vanished. The scanner went silent. Completely silent. The kind of silence that felt intentional. I stepped back without meaning to. My heel scraped against the porch, loud in the stillness. My breath caught, and I couldn't tell whether I was cold or just frightened in a way I didn't have a name for. Pierce tapped the scanner, checked the settings, lifted the antenna again. Nothing, just air. Plain quiet air. He frowned, the expression tightening the corners of his mouth. "It shouldn't do that," he said softly. "Not unless something interferes with it." I looked at Lily's window again. For a moment I could almost picture her standing behind it, her small hand pressed to the glass, eyes wide in that way she had when she was trying to listen to things I couldn't hear. The thought made my chest ache. Pierce walked a few steps toward the fence line, scanning the yard in slow arcs. I watched the back of his jacket rise and fall with each measured breath. He was calm, but I could tell it wasn't the comforting kind of calm, more like the kind people wear when they're trying not to show they're afraid. I followed his gaze across the empty yard, but something deeper than sight was stirring in me. Because even though no one was there, I felt watched. Not by a person. Not by an animal. Just watched. As if the silence itself had eyes. Pierce finally lowered the scanner, shaking his head. "Whatever it was," he murmured, "it's gone now." I wished I believed him. The wind picked up, only a little brushing past us like a stranger squeezing through a narrow doorway. I looked towards the back corner of the yard where the shadows sat thicker, quieter. Nothing moved. But the stillness clung to me, like something waiting just outside the edges of sound. Maybe the night was empty, or maybe emptiness had a voice after all. And I just heard the first breath of it. The kitchen table was never meant to hold anything heavy, but it groaned softly beneath the weight of Pierce's map. Paper spread out like a quiet confession, corners curling, edges worn from too many nights of worry. He didn't say a word at first, just smoothed the map with the flat of his hand, the way someone calms a trembling animal. And I felt, before I understood, that whatever he was about to show me wasn't new. Just newly revealed. The morning light struggled to come through the windows. It sat pale on the counter, washed thin by the clouds that had been gathering all week, the kind of grey that made everything feel farther away than it should. Pierce stood across from me, shoulders hunched forward, jacket still damp from the frost outside. His eyes were fixed on the map, not on me. That told me more than anything he could have said out loud. I sat slowly, my fingers brushing the wooden chair, tracing old scratches Lily had made when she couldn't sit still during homework. Little grooves, tiny lines, a lifetime in small marks. Pierce took a pen from his pocket, blue, slightly chewed on the cap, and pressed the tip against the paper. "These," he said quietly, "are all the incidents reported this month." He marked a small X near the North Road where the Harpers lived. Another near Mrs. Ellison's backyard. Another by the lake path. Another 2 streets over where a family lost their dog. Each tap of the pen felt like a heartbeat I didn't want to listen to. The marks scattered the map like drops of rain. At first, random, meaningless, but not for long. Pierce stepped back, drawing a slow breath, and traced an invisible line from one X to the next. "Watch," he murmured. His finger moved not with certainty, but resignation, like a truth he'd been avoiding had finally cornered him. And maybe me too. He connected the marks one by one with the soft scrape of the pen. The lines curved, bent, formed something I couldn't name yet, but my stomach knew before my mind did. A circle. Uneven, imperfect, but unmistakable. A ring of incidents, every point tied to a moment of strangeness. Flickering porch lights. Birds humming in the night. Animals gone without a trace. And now, Lily. My mouth felt dry. I leaned in, my hand flat on the table to steady myself. Pierce didn't look up, didn't check my reaction. He was focused entirely on the centre of his rough circle. In the middle of the map, dead centre, was a blank patch of neighbourhood space. My street, my house. He tapped once more, gently, as if afraid to break the paper. "Here," he said. Everything curves back here." I swallowed, the room suddenly too quiet. "And the exact centre," he added, softer than before, "is the north-facing wall of your house. The wall aligned with Lily's bedroom. The same wall where the strange light had hovered. The same window where the static had whispered." I didn't realise I had stopped breathing until Pierce finally lifted his eyes. My voice barely formed. "This didn't start last night." Pierce shook his head, slowly, regretfully. "No, I think it's been happening for weeks, maybe longer." My hands curled in my lap. It felt like the world had tilted, just slightly, but enough that everything inside me slipped out of place. "I should have seen something," I whispered. "You couldn't have known," he replied, but the gentleness in his voice didn't reach his face. I looked at the circle again, a shape made of small, ordinary events, nothing dramatic on its own, nothing alarming enough to raise a fuss. Just flickers. Noises. Missing things. Little ripples in the dark, like something drawing closer in tiny steps. A chill climbed up my back, slow as rising water, not sharp, just cold in a way that made me feel hollow. "What if she wasn't taken by surprise?" I said softly. "What if she'd been noticing this for days?" Pierce didn't answer. And maybe he didn't need to, because I remembered the note. The dreams. The whispers she said she heard. "Mom, I don't think the night is empty." I used to tell her it was just the wind, or branches, or nerves. I had been so sure the world was ordinary. Now I wasn't sure the night had ever been empty at all. The light shifted across the map as a cloud moved outside, dimming the room even further. The circle of ink looked darker in that soft shadow, like it had sunk into the page. Pierce folded his arms but didn't touch the map again. Neither did I. Because now the pattern was etched in more than paper. It was in my mind, my ribs, my pulse. Everything led here. Right to Lily. Right to her window. I stood slowly, the world quiet in the wrong way. If the circle had been closing for weeks, then something had been coming long before I ever realised it. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't finished yet. The house was quiet enough to hear the refrigerator breathing. I lay on the couch staring at the ceiling where faint lines of plaster curved like rivers on an old map. Some nights silence feels like kindness. But that night, it felt like something waiting. And somewhere past the walls, past the thin dark of the hallway, the house seemed to hold its breath along with me. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my bedroom. Not with the map still folded on the table. Not with Lily's window sitting like a question I couldn't answer. So I stayed on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of detergent and last week's sunlight. The cushions sagged under my weight, familiar in a way that would have comforted me any other night. But the floor kept making small sounds. Little taps, like it remembered footsteps that weren't mine. The digital clock on the wall glowed a dim, stubborn blue. 2:47 a.m., then 2:51, then 2:57. The minutes didn't move, so much as glide past me, slow as oil. I closed my eyes just to rest them, not to sleep. I'd told myself that. The house creaked once, a low groan settling into the wood. It wasn't unusual. Old homes talked in the dark. But then the groan faded, and something else rose in its place. A sound I had heard before. A sound I had tried very hard to forget. A humming. Soft. Steady. Almost musical. At first, I thought I imagined it. The way grief sometimes tricks the ears gives shape to air that doesn't hold anything at all. But the humming didn't fade. It grew. So quietly it was almost shy. My hand tightened on the blanket. I pushed myself up slowly, like any sudden movement might scare the sound away. The room felt different now. The air thicker. The shadows deeper around the edges. I stood, bare feet touching the cool floor. The wood didn't creak under me, not this time, as if it didn't want to interrupt. The humming drifted through the hallway, coming from the far end of the house. From Lily's room. I took one step, then another. Each footfall echoed a little more than it should have. The kind of echo that felt borrowed from a place not entirely inside my home. The humming wavered, a low vibration that brushed the walls. For a moment, it almost sounded familiar. Like a voice stretched out thin, trying its best to form a tune I used to know. My breath hitched. Lily? The word barely left my mouth. The humming answered by trembling once, like someone exhaled behind a closed door. I reached the end of the hall. Lily's door stood slightly open, not wide, but enough for darkness to lean through it like a shadow listening. The air shifted as I approached. A warmth rolled over me, gentle but strange, like the heat left behind after someone walks past you. My skin prickled. The rest of the house was cold, but here it felt lived in, occupied. I touched the edge of the door with the tips of my fingers. The wood was warm. The humming grew clearer, but somehow more distant, too stretched out, as if the room itself was swallowing it slowly. I pushed the door open. The darkness inside didn't change. No sudden movement. No figure. No breath. Just the soft outline of her bed, her chair, her shelves. Every object holding its shape in the faint moonlight. The humming stopped. Cut clean. Like someone pressed their hand over a mouth mid-song. My voice trembled without sound. I stepped inside, feeling the warmth fade 1 inch at a time. The room held a stillness that wasn't comforting. It felt like something had just left. Like I had missed someone by seconds. Or like someone was still there. Just not where I could see them. I stood in the center of her room, afraid to breathe too loudly. The walls seemed to pulse with the afterglow of that strange warmth, like a presence had brushed against them. The silence was thick, almost humming on its own. I placed my hand on Lily's pillow. It was warm, not from the sun, not from a heater, not from imagination. Warm like a head had rested there. Moments ago, I looked at the empty room around me, empty in a way that didn't feel empty at all. If she had been here, why couldn't I see her? And worse, why did it feel like she might still be watching me from somewhere just beyond the dark? The first light of dawn pressed against the glass, soft and pale. I had been watching the world wake slowly, thinking the house was finally quiet. Then my eyes caught it, a faint mark on Lily's window. A small palm, smudged, sliding downward like a whisper left behind. And for a moment, the morning felt less like morning, and more like a question. I wrapped my robe tighter around me and stepped closer. The floor creaked under my weight, the sound brittle in the new day. The kitchen clock ticked with the rhythm of a heart trying to remember itself. The mark was subtle, almost invisible except for the way the sunlight caught it. It was small, fragile, perfectly formed like Lily's hand might still fit there. I crouched, studying it, noticing the smear running down a tiny trail of heat I could almost feel without touching. All the nights I had spent wondering where she had gone. All the maps, all the humming, all the strange lights. And it came down to this. A trace on a window. A warmth left behind that spoke louder than words. I imagined her hand there, fingers pressing against the glass, palm dragging slowly, reaching for something I couldn't name. Pierce stood behind me, shifting the weight of his boots quietly on the floor. He didn't say anything yet. He rarely did. He just watched. I could feel the unease radiating from him, almost as palpable as the heat on the glass. Pierce suggested testing the print, measuring the residual warmth, looking for fingerprints. I nodded, half listening, half entranced by the faint heat seeping into my skin. I pressed my palm against it. The warmth pulsed slowly, like it had a memory of touch. "Margaret," Pierce said softly, this shouldn't still be warm if she left hours ago." I didn't respond. I just let my hand linger, letting the sensation travel up my arm. The house seemed quieter than ever. The wind outside whispered through the trees. The floorboards groaned under the weight of the morning. I whispered her name, softly, almost a song. "Lily." No answer. Just the faint vibration of warmth where her palm had been. I traced the smudge downward with my fingers, careful not to erase it. Each centimetre felt like following a breadcrumb left in some other world. The shape of her hand was so intimate, so real. It made the emptiness of her room feel even heavier, like a space that shouldn't exist without her. Pierce stepped closer, voice low. "Could she have come back?" I shook my head, unsure if I meant yes or no. The mark said something else entirely, something my mind couldn't reach yet. The warmth lingered, even as the sun climbed higher. I pulled my hand away, slowly, reluctant to let go. It was like the heat carried a piece of her with it, a pulse that said she had been here just moments ago, or maybe forever ago. Pierce circled to the other side, squinting through the glass. He muttered about angles, light and shadows, but I barely heard him. I was thinking about Lily. The smear traced a line downward. A drag, a movement that implied hesitation. Purpose, something deliberate, fragile and human. I wondered what she had been reaching for. Was it freedom? Was it fear? Or had she simply been trying to leave a trace, a whisper only I could read? I could still feel the heat on my fingers, a slow tremor against my skin. It was a message, a signal. But it didn't tell me why. It only told me she had been here, and that for some reason she had chosen to leave a part of herself behind. I stepped back from the window. The light shifted, stretching across the room and illuminating the quiet objects around her bed. The warmth faded slowly, but the memory of it lingered like smoke in the air. I whispered her name again. "Lily." No answer. Just the faint outline of her hand, pressed into the glass and tracing a path I couldn't yet follow. Pierce stood silently beside me, watching the mark, but even he seemed unable to explain it. I pressed my fingers to my lips, closing my eyes. For a moment, I could almost feel her there, and then the house was quiet again. Too quiet, but the trace remained. And somehow I knew it was waiting for me to notice what it meant next. The morning light spilled softly across the back porch, stretching shadows long and quiet. I had been careful yesterday, every step measured, every corner checked. But then I saw them. Lily's shoes, neat side by side, closer to the threshold than before, as if someone had gently nudged them forward. The warmth from the soles rose like a held breath, faint but undeniable. And suddenly the house felt alive in a way that made my chest ache. I froze, robe clutched tightly around me, toes brushing the cold wooden floor. The air smelled faintly of rain from the night before, damp and earthy. Every creak of the boards sounded louder than usual. Yesterday I had touched them, Pierce had touched them, no one had moved them since. And yet, here they were, closer, almost like a signal. I sank into the chair on the porch, hands resting against the railing, staring. The sunlight caught the edges of the shoes, highlighting the scuffed toes and the faint outline of small, persistent wear. Each mark on them carried a memory, the way she had run across the yard, the way she had tiptoed past me when I wasn't looking. I imagined her standing there, invisible, just out of reach. And for the first time since she disappeared, I felt a shiver of hope, tangled with fear. Pierce's voice came soft behind me. "Margaret." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My gaze stayed locked on the shoes, waiting, listening for a sign that the house might be breathing in time with me. I leaned closer, careful not to disturb them. The warmth pulsed gently through the soles like tiny heartbeats pressed into rubber and leather. I traced the outline with my eyes, wondering if it was a trick of sunlight or something else entirely. Yesterday the porch had been silent, empty. Now it felt alive, like the space itself was holding its breath, keeping a secret. Pierce crouched beside me, examining the ground for footprints. "There's nothing," he said, voice low. "No prints, no marks, nothing that explains this." I nodded, unable to speak. My mind ran through every possibility. Animals, wind, a trick of the light. No, none of it fit. I whispered Lily's name into the quiet. "Lily." Nothing, except the faint warmth lingering under the shoes. It was enough to make my heart pound with the impossible notion she might be moving through the house unseen, watching, waiting. I swallowed hard. The thought made my chest tighten and my skin prickle. If she was here, close enough to leave a trace, why hadn't she come back to me yet? I knelt, letting my hands hover over the shoes without touching. The heat was real, not imagined. A presence had been here, had been near. Pierce straightened, glancing toward the window. "This doesn't make sense," he murmured. "Someone or something is aware of the house, of you, of her." I felt the weight of the possibility pressing down, heavy and strange. A terrible hope. Lily wasn't gone entirely. She hadn't abandoned us. But then came the other feeling. The fear that she could move unseen, untouched, yet remain just out of reach. What was holding her back? Why didn't she cross the threshold? I whispered again, almost afraid to hear an answer. "Lily." The porch remained quiet, yet the warmth beneath the shoes pulsed, faintly, insistently, like a heartbeat echoing through the floorboards. It was impossible, improbable, and yet undeniable. For the first time I felt the weight of the night pressing into day, the memory of absence brushing against this fragile sign of presence. Something had changed. Something had come back, even if it hadn't returned in full. I sat back, watching the sunlight stretch across the porch. The shoes, warm and patient, waited as if she had only stepped away for a moment. The breeze whispered through the trees, brushing against my face, like a soft hand. Pierce said nothing, but I knew he felt it too. Something moved in the quiet of the house, unseen, deliberate. I pressed my palm over the top of the shoes, feeling the faint heat seep into my fingers. "Come home," I whispered. And for a heartbeat, I imagined she might. But the shoes stayed, and the house held its breath, waiting. The impossible truth pressed against me. Lily may be gone, but she is not left. And if she's still here, what keeps her from stepping across the threshold? If Lily's story has stayed with you, if the quiet moments and the unseen truths matter, subscribe to Her Truth Matters. Every story, every secret, every voice deserves to be heard. Turn on notifications and join us, because her truth and every truth matters.